What I'd like to do, very welcome, very happy to have you here. What I'd like to do is for us to very briefly go around and introduce ourselves with just a few words so that we know who's in this space before we start our consultation. So, as you know, my name's Elena, and I'm a psychotherapist in Arlington, Virginia, and have been really inspired by this very dear man, Josh here, who last year, after a talk at a fireside, said we really need adult development coaching. Many of us really need this in this professional crazy city. How to move into more functional experience of adulthood, more expansive, more liberating, less stressful, less defined by our tightly carved identities. And so we started a series on adult development, and very quickly it became clear that the real question of adult development really at this time for all of us is about understanding the intersection between the psychological and the spiritual, both on an individual level and also on a global, societal and global level. And so it became clear that really that should be the focus of the series. And so we shifted gears in the new year and started here, as many of you know and have been coming. And this is, I believe, our 7th meeting. And we have eighth meeting, yes. Thank you guys. I'm glad everybody's so aware of these gatherings. Very grateful for that. Yes. And so what we started by doing is I had a sense that there was some very systematic and structured exploration needed of the intersection between the psychological and the spiritual. And so we began by a series of lectures which I prepared to try to examine this territory. Not that one could ever examine it in an exhaustive manner, but to really lay out what seemed to me to be central concepts and central questions. And as you know, in our first lecture, we spoke about the nature of health, and we spoke about really what is this intersection between the psychological and the spiritual. And I introduced the concept of languages. Languages as holding environments, languages that really contextualize how we actually think, most of the time unbeknownst to us. Internalized languages, both personal and collective. Public and private languages really contextualize how we think. They also are the context of how we experience life. So I felt that languages as actually holding environments was one of the most invisible dimensions, rarely appreciated dimensions of the intersection between psychological and spiritual. Because oftentimes, even when our languages intend to have a more spiritual dimension, they come across ideological, rigid, dogmatic, and can be quite disillusioning. And then, of course, there are languages that don't even attempt the spiritual dimension and make us think in very reductionist ways. So that was the nature of our first lecture exploration. We kept coming back to that. And then we went to the nature of mind, which, of course, is this luminous gift through which we make sense of reality. And we spoke about the mind as a process that is constantly seeking to integrate itself, and we describe this integrative process. And Bernard, I have a handout for you of something that I think you might appreciate. I'll actually offer it a bit later. This is just a quick summary. Then we went from mind to a deeper epistemology, which we referred to as a heart-mind epistemology, and that was the focus of our third lecture. And then we explored languages that construct socio-historical and planetary understanding in more expansive and meaningful and spiritual terms. And then you actually had the benefit of a beautiful summary of themes by Josh, which I highly recommend to those of you who haven't had a chance to hear that talk. It's on the website where all the other talks are, and it really is such a succinct summary. I will be actually referring to it in my summary notes. Then we came back, and it was the Students' March, and we felt that the most appropriate topic for that gathering would be languages of reverence. Because really that's what's so profoundly missing in a public space. There's reverence for nothing. Yeah. There's actually no reverence for human life. But then languages of reverence themselves can be traps. Because sometimes there is a claim that there's reverence, but languages actually sound rather limiting, ideological, and dogmatic. So we really explored what is the experience of reverence, and how can you know a language that is truly spiritual, a language that truly liberates you, a language that does not limit but sets the heart and the soul free and opens up larger horizons. So that was the topic of that lecture on reverence. And then last meeting, we did what to me felt like an epitome of this series, which was an excursion into the nature and developmental dynamics of free will, which was quite a powerful excursion. I had some lovely comments from people who were here. And I offered a developmental perspective on the evolution of free will in the double helix of adult development, which is the first part of the helix, of course, is ego formation into adulthood, and the second part of the helix is ego transcendence. And of course, all of that for your benefit is on the website. You can hear it on YouTube. I'll share it with you, Bernard, as well. A lot of this information is there. And today, what I was hoping to do is to give you a brief sense of how I see it all coming together in conversation with Josh, who has the most integrative mind. And it's really a delight to be in conversation with him because he just really keys in on what matters. So this is a very lengthy introduction of me, but maybe we can still go around and have each one of you say a few words about who you are and what is your realm of service in this world currently, because that's really what matters. That's why we're here, trying to understand how we can meaningfully serve this world. And you don't have to be exhaustive, but just tell us what is your realm. Please.
So about a year ago, my name is Josh. About a year ago, when I heard Dr. Elena speak at this small gathering, and she mentioned in that gathering that adults continue to develop throughout their lives, which is not something that has always been agreed upon, and that some theorists have been able to identify 9 or 10 levels of adult development, identifiable, definable, observable levels of adult development. So I went up to her afterwards and I said, can we talk about what those levels are and how to achieve them? I mean, what does that even mean, and how can we do it? Because I want that. I want to grow. I want to develop. And so that was, a course of dialogue back and forth. And even being in that room with Dr. Elena to listen to that talk had been a kind of culmination for me, or a kind of an end of a certain part of a process of a journey of new openness to spirituality and to people from different parts of the world, that they gave me a broader perspective about the world and my place within it. And so I'm a corporate lawyer. I work in the financial services area of law. And in the last year and a half, I've been on this effort, as I've gone through this personal transformation of really trying to change my career and thinking about, I want to make my career more about these high-minded ideas of service, of consciousness, of social transformation. And I really made a lot of effort to explore different routes and different avenues. And all of those doors just closed. All the things that made sense kept closing. And I decided about a month and a half ago that this was a divine sign that maybe my purpose was to stay within the law and that there was a way for me to integrate the ideas and the purposes that had come into my life in the context that I was in. And so I have applied for it, and was given an offer and have accepted a new job at another law firm that's going to be doing financial technology. And so the focus really is on representing and advising startups, new technology companies that are trying to transform the financial sector. And my mind and ideas are exploding in terms of all the different ways that this could bring about positive social change. The tens of millions of Americans who don't have a debit card, who are locked out of the financial system, who aren't able to build wealth for themselves and their families. The possibility of disrupting one of the most exploitive industries in the world. New models emerging where rather than making money through overdraft fees and hidden fees and deception, they're making money through helping people build wealth and really changing the model and the paradigm. And so it's a really exciting prospect. And just in terms of this process for me has given me the tools and really the vision for what it means to live each moment of every day in a way that's present, that's purposeful, and that allows me to serve and to kind of look at my job and to look at those relationships and those financial products that we're doing, and just to see it from the perspective of how can I serve the client, can I serve humanity at the very micro level, and being in the moment there. And it's been a wonderful journey. I'm certainly still figuring out the building blocks of that in many ways, but it's been a joy to be a part of this group with all of you.
Thank you.
Who is Dr. Lan? Where was that? Dr. Lan?
Dr. Elena.
Oh,
Dr. Lan?
She's right here.
Oh, dear. I didn't hear that right, sorry.
that's quite all right.
She's quite inspiring. I recommend her.
Please.
And you never hear.
Not in this space, but at a gathering.
Oh, talking about adult development.
I doubt it. I doubt it. But I am puzzled by why there is so little talk in the public sphere about adult development. That puzzles me, given that the field exists and the knowledge is out there. I just am stunned by how much psychology has really not defined its realm of impact societally and globally. Which is why a team of us some years ago, Bernard, are you bothered by the sun? You want to push back now? You good? All right. A few years ago, a team of us came together to develop this volume that got published, Towards a Socially Responsible Psychology for a Global Era.
Wow.
Really looking carefully at the whole field and asking the question, why has psychology defined such a limited impact for itself, mostly in the consultation room, when the knowledge of psychology is so systemic and so transformative potentially? And to me, adult development is completely a transformative field, because you can look at all social processes in all kinds of organizations, including religious groups and political groups and all kinds of organizations, from the point of view of principles of adult development, and see really how they construct their goals and how they construct their processes. And that's a very important understanding in terms of what's going to work or what's going to limit people. So yes, this has been an expansive conversation. And so now I feel I'm facing an enormous challenge, and I know you will be invaluable in it, because you have already put forth so much. And I'd like to find a way to bring this together. And obviously, I was not exactly prepared for that. And so this is going to be inspirational. So we have to really see the convergence in everything that was shared so far and see our way forward. So Josh, I know you're listening with those ears, and jump right in. So again, where we started this series was with an understanding that the way we're currently doing things, the understanding that we're currently bringing to things, is not delivering us. That was what began this conversation. And I have heard, yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you answer the question of what we were answering?
I'm sorry?
The question that we were answering
About
about
your realm of
ourselves?
service.
Oh,
My realm of
we
service.
know your realm of service.
Oh,
But can we hear it?
yes. Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Can you hear it from me? Well, maybe I can hear it from myself. Let's see. My realm of service. I think it's all of my life. I really can't separate it. I think I was an educator at the age of 6, watching people, mostly people in conflict, and really trying to understand, why is this necessary? Why are we doing this to each other? Where is this coming from? And why is kindness considered weakness? So I was told as a child that I'm kind of naive, don't get it, probably weak. And yet none of this made sense to me. So I've been trying to understand most of my life how we can really rethink what we're doing, basically. So then that took many shapes and forms and iterations in the past X number of decades, a few. But first it was literature and philosophy, because that's kind of classic for East Europeans. You go to literature and philosophy and this history of art to try to figure out where humanity is headed and the nature of the human psyche and the nature of civilization. So that was the path. And then it went into psycholinguistics and trying to understand the connection between the languaging and the psychological, language and thought, the dual relationship between language and thought. So I was quite scholarly minded and most of my life. So people thought I was just a bookworm, basically.
Egghead is the term they use.
A what?
Egghead.
Egghead. Okay. Bookworm was it in my part of the word. Egghead. I'll take both. Egghead and bookworm. In any case, I was trying to understand. And I was trying to understand how we can rethink. So this has just been all of my life. But then at some point I realized that it's really all about motivation, understanding motivation. So I came to the US to do a PhD in to try to understand human motivation. And the question I was asking, the single question that really brought me to my work was, why do we betray ourselves? So that ended up into a study of critical consciousness and human empowerment. And early in that process, I encountered this extraordinary Baha'i spiritual paradigm that blew my mind away. And I was right at the threshold of adult development and really could not understand why nobody in the field of adult development had told me about this comprehensive adult developmental paradigm that was just not dealing with the individual, but was dealing with adult development systemically. So from that point on, my task was to really bring together all these disparate languages that typically don't talk to each other, and to find that point of convergence which is practical and of practical service. So I ended up 9 years on an academic teaching position that became, it was a tenure track position, so I became a tenured professor in psychology. But all the teaching for me had only one purpose, and the purpose was, how do you help young people really understand their life, their purpose, their life journey in such a way that is empowering in practical ways? What are they going to translate this in? And so at some point I realized that academia actually doesn't particularly care about this question. It is not particularly interested in practical realities and practical change. Again, that academic language is yet another one of those disparate languages that don't talk with other languages. Yeah. Academic language doesn't talk with the language of spiritual communities. I mean, it's just, there's so many languages that just won't talk to each other. So I left academia and went into clinical practice and continued my mission as an educator to help people understand their inner powers, their core of reality, from which grows the experience of health and well-being. No matter what our suffering, no matter what our perplexity, finding our way to our core is the path to our own healing. It's also the path to becoming magnets for the healing and the empowerment of others. So, as I often say, we never heal alone. We always heal in communities. So, from the moment that I started to work in a clinical context primarily, I'm always looking for opportunities to foster conversations, to create communities, to open up spaces where people can heal together, because that's where healing really happens. And ultimately, my interest, of course, is global consciousness transformation. Because I came out of communism. Communism collapsed, but the ideological mentality has not. The ideological mentality is alive and well and plaguing us just as much today. And that is what has to transform, so that we can open up, so that our constructions can break open and we can actually see our family, our human family, and grasp that and work from that understanding. See the family of life, the interdependent family of all life, and construct our finances, our medicine, our education, our governance, our policies from that place. So all of this is my realm of service.
And in some ways, Western style capitalism is just as oppressive to those goals as communism, in a more, perhaps a more insidious way, more subtle way. But those competing ideologies in some ways lead to the same end, and as much as they are still completely divorcing us from ourselves, from our true nature as social and interdependent beings, and I think our potential collectively.
And the planet.
And the planet, exactly.
So if we,
For their own agenda.
For their own agenda.
Because they profit from it and they become more powerful from it.
thank you.
I'll just add as a plug to the book, Towards a Social Response. It's very expensive. Buy it used because it's priced a textbook, but it is a very, very good text.
Say the name.
What is it? Towards a social.
Towards socially responsible psychology for a global era. I can email that to you all. I
It's
will,
really-
along with the link to the article. So yes, sure.
No, it's not the same thing.
It's not. Those are different things, but they're all
Okay.
resources.
You'll give us everything.
Yes, and I'll just share
Good.
resources. So, huh?
We should get to your notes because of
Yes.
time.
Actually, I want to jump off of what you just said because it's very valuable. It goes right in the middle of my notes, but we'll
Perfect.
just go straight
Go
to the
there.
middle.
Yeah.
When you said that capitalism is an equally oppressive, though perhaps more subversively so, ideological system, I want to say that really to pick up where we left off in our last talk, we talked about the institutional self. If you all remember stage 4, which was the stage of constructing the self where we understand our values, we understand what we're about, what we're not about, therefore we also understand our boundaries. And for a while, that's a very empowering place, a very empowering institution of the self. But eventually, that place also becomes limiting because we create our own internal ideologies, what we're about, what we're against, what we're not about, etc., etc. So there's the for and against, therefore another ideology. And we said that the really meaningful journey of self-transcendence begins when we begin to experience the limits of the institutional self. Well, it is important for me as an educator and as a developmentalist to always keep going back and forth between the individual and the collective, because to me, that is the most meaningful way to understand them. And so we have to look at all the ideological isms, capitalism, communism, and actually the other isms. There's been a lot of other isms. Materialism, consumerism, secularism, thank you. Scientism, yes, and many religious isms too. By all means, as actually stage 4 constructions. So there was a time where these institutional ideologies actually served a purpose and they were an advancement. So, in order to overcome dichotomies, we have to really adopt a developmental perspective and see how everything at its own time and place serves a purpose. But eventually, if it becomes static, if it insists on remaining the same, it becomes
Cage.
what is the word against progress? It becomes
regressive.
Obstacle?
yeah, something with R. It's very close to this, but it will come to me.
Not reactionary?
Reactionary,
Restrictive.
Anyways, we cannot insist on any construction remaining final. Because we keep saying here in our talks that the forward life is motion, and the forward motion of life is development, evolution. It's an evolutionary motion. And so communism attempted to construct the idea of human equality,
Yes.
which was remarkable. It really was remarkable. And some of those minds that gave their lives for that idea were remarkable souls. Of course, when the attempt was made to create a static system out of it that had for and against embedded in it, very quickly that system lost its initial meaning and energy and began to work against itself, undermine itself until it collapsed. The same has been happening with capitalism, which really sought to liberate human initiative and entrepreneurship. And a number of you mentioned great examples of private small-scale entrepreneurship, which is transformative. And really is going in the direction of social justice, planetary justice, environmental justice. Some of the small NGOs that Earl works with in the most undeveloped parts of the world just blow my mind away. These people are so resourceful, so entrepreneurial. So capitalism really released that spirit, the spirit of creating small institutions that work, that actually work with processes that work. And for a while, it was very effective. The problem is that we are treating it as the end-all, be-all. We are exporting it into the world. We're creating all kinds of pansy schemes that make it increasingly unsustainable. And the worst problem is that we are dividing money is us, them is everybody who's not in the business and making money, and the whole of nature, the whole of our planet is them. So this is where capitalism is collapsing, because it is destroying the very ground that sustains us.
And whereas it previously unleashed individual initiative, it baked individualism, the idea of ourselves as a primary, essential, and perhaps only unit that matters, as an essential element of human nature, and as the only way to actually self-actualization, completely eliminating any notion of solidarity, community,
Self-transcendence.
Self-transcendence.
There's no
Even
self-transcendence, there's
Yeah.
only self-actualization.
Right.
Pursuing your interests.
Right.
So the whole second spiral of the helix of development got cut off and eliminated, and it's not part of our public discourse. So is it any wonder that this public discourse is so reductionist, so limiting, and so undermining that the majority of people are walking around depressed and anxiety-ridden? Okay, so these are two isms, but if we take some of the other isms, so many of the religious paradigms have been revolutionary in their own right. Well, every religious paradigm has been revolutionary in its own right, in its own time. And it has really taken humanity to that very next level of thinking and understanding of what is self, what is other, and how we relate, how self relates to other and to communities of others. And then each of these paradigms, which were dynamic, energetic, relational, and evolutionary for a while, got established into institutions. And those institutions began to protect their own existence.
Yeah.
And with that, the impact of that particular paradigm, whether we're talking about Christianity, whether we're talking about Islam, even Buddhism, which gets sold to the Western world as a very liberated religion, and most people in the West don't hear that Buddhists and Muslims are really at war in the most brutal of ways. And of course, the greatest example right now is Myanmar. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, these are ideologies that get sold to us that we don't necessarily examine. And so for me, as having discovered this extraordinary Baha'i global paradigm 24 years ago, myself, I care very deeply about how to speak about this paradigm and make it more known to people in the sciences, in the humanities, in the environmental communities, and really across spiritual communities and political communities, but in a way that speaks a language that is dynamic, not static, not we believe in this and this, but a language that really opens up spaces where conversations and evolutionary decision making can happen. So I find this to be a collective movement in our planet. Some of it is directly inspired by this extraordinary understanding that was released into the world 160 years ago, and which I think as citizens of the 21st century, all of us should really be familiar with, just familiar with. Some of these processes were directly influenced by this understanding, but many of them are just energetically and globally intuiting this understanding without even suspecting its existence, as we see people from every corner of the planet intelligently, entrepreneurially, and in every imaginative way pushing for global unity and the recognition of our interdependence. So to me, that is a phenomenal process, which of course is not reflected in the media, and it's very important that we keep reflecting it and speaking more to that process, because people are downhearted when they don't hear about this. And so there is a movement collectively beyond our institutional selves and beyond institutions that are embodiments of institutional selves, a movement towards inter-individuality, which is stage 5 in the helix, and really the stage that sort of opens up the second part of the helix of self-transcendence. This inter-individuality where we're each clearly articulated self-systems that understand our own core, are awakened to our own core and empowered by our understanding of who we really are. So clearly and well articulated self-systems who each of us understand the intersection between the physical, the mental, and the spiritual within us as healthy systems. Please.
Interject here. So really, I just found it so interesting when I was mentioning about individualism, and then I immediately said that, and then what's missing is solidarity, the community, the collective. And what I realized is you took it back to, that was 2 steps away. You took it back to this question of self-transcendence first, because at the institutional stage, at this level of self-actualization, ego development, the individual is in opposition to the community, or at least is in tension with the community. It's me, it's them, it's my beliefs, it's their beliefs. It's sort of this paradigm. It's only through the self-transcendence, when we transcend the ego, and as others do that, then we become a part of this unified collective, where our unified consciousness, where our collective identity as transcended, as self-transcended souls becomes our collective interests and our collective self.
Thank you. So the movement that you're describing is a movement towards realizing our interdependence. And that is really the movement beyond the institutional self. Increasingly, and that is what brings on the humility and the experience of self-transcendence, is recognizing our interdependence, which we felt from the moment we started speaking in this room. I mean, you noticed how convergent and connected everything that you were saying spontaneously was. So clearly, we are deeply interdependent in ways both energetic, that are so subtle that we can't really describe them, and in many other ways. So this awakening to interdependence is the movement towards the second part of the helix. And this is what you see globally. People are understanding interdependence sometimes financially in terms of small, what was it called? Microfinance, thank you. People are understanding it environmentally, that we really cannot survive unless we conserve our resources on every level. People are understanding it in terms of just reaching out to each other. There is a phenomenal awakening. It is not understood and it is not reported, and we don't have the frame of reference to grasp it enough to channel our own efforts with it systematically, which is what I think in these conversations has been a bit of an effort.
Does this relate to what you talked about, was it last week, with the 4 levels and then the self-transcendence with other levels?
Yes.
Would it help our work to understand those levels more explicitly? I mean,
You know-
you keep referring to it, but I'm like, whoa, I need tools.
You know, Shirley, I think this is a very wonderful and valid question, and I'd like to come back to it when we're consulting about how we want to move forward.
Right.
I am very happy to share more theoretical perspectives. I also feel very moved to alternate that with some
Right.
more practical dimensions of our movement forward. So certainly,
It's a
but let's
question.
just see.
Just a question.
It is a standing question and a very good question, and I think we all want to understand that second part of the helix better. But maybe there's a way we can think about understanding it both theoretically and also in terms of praxis. What will that look like in our fields of praxis? What would that look like in terms of expanding the impact of this group? Maybe these are some ways to think about this. So, just a quick quote here from the Bible that, again, got sent into my inbox in the same way that everything else happens. Somebody commented, amazing how manifestations of God could project into 2018 and beyond in such graphic terms. Follows a quote from the Bible. So apparently 21 centuries ago. In the last days, perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemous, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than love of God. The Holy Bible.
What quote, what verse?
It's Isaiah.
I don't know. It's not
I'm
quoted
almost
here.
certain it's
We can
Isaiah.
find it.
It's
Sure,
in-
we can find it.
It's like I think it's Isaiah 11 or maybe 50. I'm not sure. I didn't
Thank
send
you.
it, but I recognize it.
Well, I can again share it along with everything else,
Sure,
and you
we can
guys can
Google it and
localize,
find it.
or I can also share who posted it, and he can tell us
Great.
the exact source. But I'm sure you're right, actually. So,
It's got a pretty deep knowledge of
a lifetime of it.
Steeped in it, raised in it, yeah.
Do you want to clarify that?
Oh, no, I was raised in a very strong Christian family, and we studied the Bible every morning together. And the church we went to every Sunday was a very Bible. It was called a Bible church. It was a non-denominational church, and the pastor, who had his PhD in theology, would methodically go verse by verse through chapters of the Bible, and would speak at from the Greek and the Hebrew and the language, and it was a wonderful spiritual education. Yeah.
Where was it? Not here.
The Buckle of the Bible Belt, Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay. So, back to our vision. Apparently what we're needing, what we're looking for is a macro evolutionary approach to the story of who we are and what our societies are about. I'm going to say this again.
Say that again.
Apparently what we're looking for is a macro evolutionary approach to the story of who we are and what our societies are about. Because these finite stories that we've told, these finite ideological stories where one ideology is pitted against another, are at this point very clearly ecologically, politically, socially, financially, and psychologically unsustainable.
Yeah, right.
Completely leading us to collapse. So we are really looking for a macro evolutionary approach to the story of who we are as individuals and as collective human beings, and also what our societies are about.
When you say we there, do you mean collectively we, or do you mean this group we?
Both.
Okay.
I will say we as humanity was the way I was moved to say it.
Yeah.
And a lot of humanity is doing that very intuitively. And those of us who are familiar with the Baha'i systematic paradigm really see it as a more systemic process, because this is the first paradigm that I am familiar with, and the only one I know, that has actually offered a very systemic historical understanding of this process, which is why I say that people in the 21st century really need to be familiar with this paradigm. Whatever people end up using it for is a second question, but familiarity with it, to me, is essential education for the 21st century. But I do think that a lot of people who are not familiar with this powerful systemic paradigm are intuiting that, and they're part of the we. We are all the we that is moving towards this macro evolutionary story and understanding. So essentially, all of our discussions so far have pointed in the direction of ecological consciousness. We've spoken about our personal and familial ecologies, our professional ecologies. We've spoken about the ecologies of our realms of service. You did so beautifully today, all of you. But we are really, all of us, discussing here, and humanity is sensing a need for this movement towards ecological consciousness, which is consciousness of all the contexts in which we're embedded and with which we're interdependent. We're interdependent with each other. We're interdependent with all of our contexts, from family context to city to country to planet, of course, to our immediate environments. On every level of analysis, these are ecologies. Of course, the field of deep ecology is perhaps the field that has come closest to trying to evolve a systemic approach here. So, and what's characteristic of ecological consciousness is that we're no longer simply mitigating for damage. So at the institutional level, we mitigate for damage. So all isms mitigate for damage done by previous isms and try to mitigate their own damage. So capitalism is now trying to mitigate by funding some resources, channeling some peanut resources into actually humanitarian and environmental issues. But it's a mitigatory effort. It's completely not enough to resolve the issue. And religious communities that have for centuries separated their populations from other populations and inspired distrust and fear are also at the same time sort of kind of supporting an interfaith movement that is in an effort to mitigate the extreme harm of divisiveness. But when it comes to the interfaith movement actually articulating the common ethical and spiritual core that is much more fundamental than our different and dividing dogmas, that's where the interfaith movement still seems rather uncomfortable going. So the emphasis seems to be still preserve our separateness and just mitigate hostility with some tolerance. These are still institutional ideological frameworks. And ultimately, they do not deliver. Ecological consciousness is actually understanding religion as well as politics and environment as contexts, embedded contexts in which we're all interdependent. How do we talk across these contexts? So this really is about us finally becoming adults. And I have a feeling that that's what this student movement is actually trying to tell policymakers, yes, in DC, but actually all of the US. Grow up, people. Act like adults. Well, there is an actual field of adult development that breaks down what it means to act like an adult. So let's not use this as a platitude. Let's use it analytically. To be an adult actually means to understand reality and act accordingly. That's what we call a mature adult. A mature adult is one who understands reality comprehensively enough that they can act accordingly and efficiently. I think you spoke about that. Efficiently, with the least waste of energetic resources. There will always be some waste, but with the least waste. Well, reality, according to everything scientific that we're hearing and seeing, is completely interdependent. There's enough science that makes that completely clear. So all of us adults that are walking in denial of that are actually walking adolescents in adult bodies. Many of us in governing positions, in decision-making positions, where we are denying the science of interdependence in order to protect our electorate, the interests of our particular ideological circle, of our particular turf. That is not mature adult behavior, because it's denying reality, the reality of interdependence, and it is not acting accordingly. It's creating policies that are becoming increasingly unsustainable and destructive. So apparently the kids are out everywhere all over the US to tell adults, you guys have gotten a little bit stuck with your attachments and institutions. We understand the concept of the right to bear arms and defend yourself. We understand where it's coming from at the very least. But you guys, with your addiction to your rights.
Unfettered access to automatic weapons.
Yes.
Disarm all the teachers.
Without any questions asked. Yes, arm all the teachers, right. So here we are. Then the young people are calling us to the next level of organization of self and other. That is the next level of adult development, which is really the first stage of proper adult development. Young people are calling us to that. Well, you might be amused to hear a bit of Baha'i religious history. When the Baha'i dispensation began, it was inaugurated by a youth who was, 24 years old? 24 years old. The people who first realized his presence among them were not informed. They were young people, sometimes in their teens and early 20s, that oftentimes realized his presence in the dreams. Many of them recognized him without being told anything. So in this Baha'i dispensation that began in the middle of the 19th century in probably one of the darkest places of Iran at the time, it was youth that absolutely led forward. And when this young man, known by the name of the Bab, stood in front of the Islamic mullahs and declared that he has come to release a new light of religious and spiritual understanding into the world and refresh these old and static systems, the mullahs were ready to tear him to pieces, and they were saying, how dare this youth stand in front of us and teach us what we should and should not do. Well, friends, 170 years or whatever the math forward, fast forward, 179, thank you.
175.
175, here we go, thank you. The youth once again is telling us, all right, time to grow up. Time to reconstruct at the next developmental level. You adults, how you adults understand what is self and what is other, and how you make policies that protect the other. The other being all of us and the planet. So the question is, what does that mean now for us? Okay, we know as a human species, we are not now anymore biologically evolving. We are evolving socially. It is social evolution at this point. And the core of social evolution is education. And so it looks to me that our task is to think very practically, very pragmatically, very concretely going forward about opening up various educational forums, dialogues, and like this here, that bring together the vast body of knowledge and expertise and skills that we already have globally into relevance in terms of becoming adults collectively. And so it seems to me that we need to really think, how can we expand a sphere of impact? Now I'm talking about we of this group, because that's what we were going to consult on today. How can we create forums that are extensions of this one, that reach different populations, and that speak both to the rational mind, as this forum has, and also to the deep spiritual impulse of every human being, as this forum has, both spoken to and acknowledged? How can we create forums that dismantle all forms of divisiveness and dichotomies, and educates in an ethic of interdependence? We have to move beyond proselytizing, but we do have to understand this extraordinary paradigm, because it's an extraordinary source of knowledge and understanding. We need to bring it into dialogue with all professional fields and expertise, so that people of all different sets of skills can bring their own sets of questions and inquiry and engage thoughtfully with this dynamic spiritual understanding, which will be illuminating for everybody, for all of us. How can we create such forums that move beyond divided loyalties? Can we begin to think about forthcoming meetings in different churches that you're all members of, maybe in other locations, professional or semi-professional locations? Is there a way to invite people who have not come this far, who may not be comfortable coming here but might come to a different location? Is that a way to open the conversation? Can we engage the Sierra Club in a meeting? Any of the institutions that you represent, serve, have access to, any and all are equally important. How can we take this conversation out into the Metro DC area? There is, to me, it seems, only a very simple set of guidelines, and they are purely developmental. And you all articulated them. I'm just going to summarize them. The three guidelines that you kept coming to were the principle of unity, the principle of unity, the fact that we are interdependent and anything that works only works when it's attempted and carried out in the spirit of unity. So non-divisiveness, the principle of unity. The principle of detachment. Detachment from what? From our own ideologies, from our own constructions, from our own opinions. We are sharing so that we can, both individually and collectively, transcend our own limitations. That is the nature of true dialogue in the spirit of detachment. There's nothing to be defended, except these principles, perhaps. And the third one was very illustrated here today by all of you, and it's the spirit of humility. We're all in this because we're looking for ground. So it appears to me that these three fundamentally developmental principles are the only appropriate guidelines for dialogue, unity, detachment, and humility that breaks all boundaries and barriers and multiplies our impact. At the beginning of this meeting, we said that we can only at best have one meeting in May, and that would be May 6th. I travel after that, and unfortunately Josh is not around, or it would have been a phenomenal meeting, but he's not here. So May 6th and then June 10th, and then we'll see after that. So with that in mind, let's initiate the consultation and see how far we go in our decision-making process.